Welcome into Boxing Scene Today. As you know, we love our boxing history. So this week in 2008, it was Miguel Cotto versus Margarito I. It's important you get the number right. The fight with the apparently loaded raps that led to one of the biggest controversies in boxing history. Was it handled the right way? Jimmy Smith in studio, joined by the champs, Chris Algieri, Paulie Malignaggi. Chris, this is our JFK assassination, right? This is our big moment that led to big changes. For people that don't remember, who weren't around in 2008, it was Miguel Cotto versus Margarito I. It was Mexico versus Puerto Rico. It was the hard hitter boxer. It was the guy, Margarito, who wore everyone out. They were colliding. Starts out tough. Margarito's is getting hurt, and then he comes back and starts hurting Cotto, and Cotto wears down. The next fight against Sugar Shane Mosley. Loaded raps are found by, I believe it was Nassim Richardson, who was inspecting the raps, finds loaded raps. Sugar Shane fights Margarito without the loaded raps, ends up dismantling Margarito. And then in the rematch, Cotto does the same thing to Margarito. Everyone believes that it ended that night, that Cotto was the victim of an absolute, let's say it, an assault, and it didn't lead to jail time for anyone. What do you remember about this whole incident, Chris, and everything around it? It was huge if you weren't there.
Yeah, this was a huge buildup as well. I actually was at the buildup fight, the fight before. They both fought at the Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City. I believe Cotto was in the main event, and he fought Alfonso Gomez, and then Margarito fought Kermit Cintron.
Yes.
And I was there in that room, and I watched
Crushed
the fight.
him.
I mean, Margarito cut through Cintron like a warm knife, like a knife through warm butter. And Cotto, I mean, just listen, Gomez was not on the level at all. You know, he had starched a very faded Arturo Gatti, but he was not on the level of a Miguel Cotto. Miguel dominated, so that set up that fight. And for the most part, you know, Cotto was a Puerto Rican star. So Puerto Rican stars fight where? On the East Coast. They fight in New York. They fight at the Garden. They fight in AC. They made the Margarito fight in MGM in Las Vegas in order to expand the fan base of Miguel Cotto. And you got Margarito, obviously, who's a Mexican fan base, so you can have his people come out. So the idea was to expand Cotto to a broader market. And man, it did not work out that way, obviously, because Margarito, as you said, went on to stop Cotto, and it was one of those fights where you're watching it, and Cotto looked really good early on, like he always does. Was boxing well, was beating Margarito up, but that's kind of how all Margarito fights kind of start. And then he just starts chomping at the bit, you know, chopping that wood, breaking you down. And Cotto, man, his face was a mess. He's getting hurt. He got hurt to the body. He goes down. Essentially, did a no mas. He went down on a knee and was like, I can't take this anymore, and just was worn out, like you said. And then we find out about these raps a couple months later, and it's just like you start putting things together. It's like, wow, was that why that fight went that way? How many fights was Margarito doing this? Because you never get caught the first time. That's you know, that's kind of the saying in your head. You never get caught the first time. So how long was this going on? Was this a one and done? What was this the only time it ever happened? We'll never know. We're obviously going to speculate, but it really makes you look at all of Margarito's career prior to that, and you're like, makes you think. So we'll never know, but I think if you look at his record, there's going to be an asterisk next to his name no matter what.
You know, in every single fight, because I remember watching that fight, and Paulie, to Chris's point, it almost looked like Cotto was melting. It was really weird. His face was falling apart. You fought Cotto. You know how tough he was. This idea that, man, it doesn't seem like Margarito hits that hard, and yet Cotto just seems to be falling apart in there. Paulie, you know, does it retroactively just kind of seem obvious, or is there, you know, is there a deeper layer to you? How do you see that fight?
Yeah, the thing is, you know, based on the evidence, you kind of want to hypothesize that he probably was doing it in that fight too. You know, you saw Cotto's face falling apart all at once. Cotto was boxing brilliantly early in that Margarito fight, you know, and then just suddenly you just started seeing the sand running out of the hourglass at a faster and faster rate until you had nothing left. But if you look at it with Margarito, there's suspicions prior to that fight as well. Obviously, the Cintron has a gripe, obviously, and I've heard Cintron talk about this as well. He feels like he has a gripe about that. But also, if you remember, I remember there was a Friday night fight against Sebastian Lujan, the Argentine,
Ooh,
that Margarito fought.
yeah.
And
Oh,
the
yeah.
Lujan ear, a complete ear was almost falling off. It was hanging by a
Yeah.
thread when he
2005,
fought
that fight.
Margarito.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Punch the meat out of
And
his ear.
Lujan,
It's
and
gross.
Lujan, again, that's kind of awkward as well. Maybe this has happened in MMA where guys' ears are fucking, sorry, freaking ripping off, but
Almost never. I can't remember one.
I,
And we have cauliflower ears that tend to blow up. Yeah.
but the ear was almost coming off. They had to stop the fight because otherwise the ear would have came off his head. It was that weird. So it's just uncommon things that you were seeing before that you retroactively now look back at it and you say, maybe this was, you can hypothesize that he was doing this before. Like the champ said, you never really get caught the first time, but then when you look at this kind of damage being done, you start to wonder. I wonder how far this was going back. It's very interesting because you typically have one of your team members watching the hand wrap. You have an inspector watching the hand wrap. But what they were doing, I think, was they were they were already pre-making the pad that you put into the hand. If you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I heard. So the pad, and even in my team, we would pre-make the pad and then leave it on the table. And typically, when I look back at it, nobody ever picks up the pad and checks what's in it. They just see that pad already pre-made. It's made out of gauze. You get your hands wrapped. The other team member is inspecting it, and nobody actually looks at the pad. Nobody grabs the pad, and so then the pad gets put on your knuckle. Your pad is basically just rolled up gauze, and then you put it on the top of the knuckle and you roll it up, and that's it. Well, apparently, what they were doing was the plaster of Paris was rolled up, and it was gauze rolled over the plaster of Paris. So you leave the gauze pad on the table. Nobody thought to pick it up and check it. Nobody ever does because I can remember even with me, nobody ever would pick up the gauze in the pad and check it. They would just check your hand wrapping. Credit to Nazim Richardson for having the presence of mind to pick it up because that's what I heard he did. I heard he picked it up, and the plaster fell out of the gauze, out of the pad wrap, and that's how they caught Margarito. Interestingly enough, Nazim Richardson is also the one who was inspecting Felix Trinidad's hand wraps when he fought Bernard Hopkins, and there was a real rap controversy there as well that is less talked about. But apparently Trinidad was also stacking tape, layering tape underneath the gauze and putting it over and then stacking tape and then layering it with gauze and stacking tape and layering it with gauze, things that you were not allowed to do. And Nazim Richardson was the one that brought it out, and they made Trinidad re-wrap. And after that, Hopkins ended up knocking him out that night. So, that one is less talked about. But in reality, Nazim Richardson, a real keen eye, responsible for two major I guess, happenings when it comes to in terms of hand wrap controversies in historical fights in boxing that may have changed boxing history.
Well, if you look at boxing history, we all know the Louis Resto Panama Lewis controversy. He was caught taking padding out of a glove and using loaded wraps. Ending the career of Irish Billy Collins. It's a famous story in boxing. They did time for assault with a deadly weapon, which was appropriate to me at the time. He was hit with a loaded glove. The idea that Margarito had big fights even after he was caught, and Sugar Shane Mosley beat the piss out of him. But this idea that he was allowed to continue a career where other guys did time for that. Do you think, Chris, the response from the athletic commissions and everyone else, including the legal bodies, do you think it was appropriate? Because I remember thinking guys did time for this.
Yeah, but the problem is that he was never technically caught after a fight. So he was never technically caught. So it was
he wasn't wrapped yet, essentially. Yeah,
right,
the fight didn't happen
before the
yet.
Shane Mosley fight. So he never went into the ring with a tainted handwrite that's been proven, and that's the issue. And even like when you see guys who fail drug tests for PEDs, and you kind of think back, it's like, oh, how long have they been doing that for? Because again, you don't get caught the first time generally. You can't go back and be like, oh well, we got to take those fights off the record because you were cheating in them, because you don't know if you weren't caught then you were essentially not in the wrong. So it's a tough one because he got caught and then he fights and he gets beat. But how many of those fights did he do before? We'll never know. And that's why I said from the very open, we'll never know. So in terms of him not getting punished to the full extent, that's kind of a gray area. That's a tough one.
The interesting thing is, one of the people asked me this. How do you know he wasn't doing that the whole time? Well, when he fought Sugar Shane, he was a different guy. He got torn apart by Sugar Shane. I remember I was calling an MMA fight, Affliction show that night, and I was kind of keeping up on things on my phone, as much as you could at that time. And Shane just killed Margarito. And if you remember, he was a huge underdog. Sugar Shane was going up. Sugar Shane hadn't looked great in previous fights.
He's older.
Yeah, and he tore Margarito apart in the rematch. Miguel Cotto tore Margarito apart. But Paulie doesn't support the idea. When was he doing this his whole career? As soon as it was stopped and he wasn't allowed to do it anymore, different guy. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, you suddenly didn't see that same Margarito,
Nope.
the one who could withstand the punishment and then come back and break you down. Now all of a sudden he had to take punishment and he wasn't breaking you down when he was responding. So essentially he was, diminished to many levels, And again, this is why people can hypothesize and look back and say, man, what becomes of this? What do you do? But like the champ said, he was never caught prior to a fight, so you can't definitively blame him. But an intelligent hypothesis probably leads people to believe and make some conclusions.
Yeah, when you look at it, Chris, I'm very curious in your career. Have you ever been hit by somebody or been in this situation of, man, this isn't normal? Something's going on here. Irish Billy Collins famously against Louis Ressa went to his corner and said, it feels like I'm getting hit by a hammer. Like, something's off. They didn't know how off it was. But I know I've locked up with guys in grappling, and I'm like, this guy is built like a rock, and he's 52. Something's going on here. Has there ever been in your career, in the amateurs or pros, that idea where you're going, okay, something's off, either PEDs or there's a loaded wrap here? Has there ever been that moment for you? Very curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, between kickboxing and boxing,
Yeah.
I'd probably say half a dozen times I've been in there with guys where I'm like, something's off here. This guy's either he's made out of something else. There's something special about this guy, or there's something a little funky about their strength or their physicality. You can just tell when guys are on certain performance enhancing drugs. Their bodies are just different. It's like banging on a wall. Some of these guys, and the punch is different. A lot of times there's a lot of differences. Their explosiveness. There's a lot of things that PEDs actually make it. That's why they're called performance enhancing drugs. In terms of hand wraps, I've never felt anything like that. Certain guys just hit harder than other people. Some people, the quote unquote, have heavy hands. Like Manny Pacquiao has bricks for hands. That's just him. And I remember Keith Thurman saying the same thing about that. He's like, man, this guy really can crack. He's not like a huge puncher. He's definitely fast, but his hands are like bricks. They're just hard. And everything he touches you with, you really feel and leaves marks. In fact, he actually cracked my sternum with a shot that missed my chin but hit me on the chest, and I still have a knot to this day from Manny Pacquiao. But that's it's Manny Pacquiao. He's one of the best to ever do it. But it happens. It's not like it doesn't happen out there. I mean, in kickboxing,
which is the Wild West, by the way, for people who don't.
PEDs and steroids are like not frowned upon at all.
Yeah.
They're a lot of times they're expected. I saw a lot of guys who were using stuff, and guys I knew that were training on the stuff, fighting on the stuff. And there was, we had very little drug testing, and even if there was, I don't think anybody cared about the results. But it definitely really rampant in kickboxing. Boxing, no. And again, never had any problems with any of the hand stuff, any hand wraps or anything that was funky in that way.
All right, so when you look at it, Paulie, as we look back on this, Margarito, never the same guy afterward, but not just that idea of this beloved Mexican warrior, a niche that he kind of had during the first Cotto fight. Now, when anybody talks about him and his legacy, it's always loaded wraps. He's a cheater. He could have killed somebody. He's not in our hearts the way a Juan Manuel Marquez is. Did he kind of flush it down the toilet with this hand wrap controversy, Margarito's legacy?
Yeah, I think, people will, reach their conclusions based on certain things, and, they have a right to. There's certainly evidence. And the mob is fickle, so, they love you one day and they hate you another day, also they'll blame you for one thing that's evidence wise obvious, but they won't blame another guy that's out for obvious things that are they're evidence wise as well. So very, very fickle. I think ultimately you can make some of the people happy some of the time. You can't make all the people happy all the time. But yeah, whatever criticism Margarito has brought on himself is likely deserved.
You'd be surprised though. There's a lot of people out there who don't think he was cheating for the Cotto fight. A lot of people, trust me. I've talked to people on the social medias, and there's a big swath of people who think that was a one and done situation and don't have the asterisk next to his name.
It was falling off naturally, I know.
Yeah. But the idea too, Chris, that after this fight, he loses to Pacquiao. Obviously, you can lose to Pacquiao. Lost to Cotto in the rematch. Eaten alive by Sugar Shane. That's the one fight that kind of stands out to me in a fight that he was favored to win, didn't look like himself, all these things in that fight. What effect do you think it had on Margarito's career after getting caught? Because after that, everybody was all over his raps. Never had a career after that, really at the level he had before.
Yeah, and I can make the argument to play devil's advocate a little bit that the controversy of the hand wrapping thing could have gotten him mentally out of the Shane fight, and then Shane being a soldier was like, oh, this guy's trying to cheat, I'm going to take this out on him, and he certainly did. Shane had that was pretty much Shane's last really good performance.
Yeah.
And he looked phenomenal that night. But so it could have been a combination of the two. It could have been, obviously it could have been the hand wrap, but also just the psychological dealing with that, getting caught and going through what that was going to mean. Because I'm sure he figured he was going to get suspended, if not fined, if not hold his purse, whatever. But really, the Pacquiao fight ended him because Pacquiao destroyed his face. His eye was never the same after that. And in fact, they had a lot of trouble even making the Cotto rematch because passing an eye exam was nearly impossible for Margarito because of the damage that he incurred in the Pacquiao fight. I met Margarito at Robert Garcia's gym. He came in after the Pacquiao fight, and his eye, he looked like the scene from the first Terminator movie where he was taking the eyeball out in the bathroom. I mean, the thing looked gnarly. It was like sunken in. There was scar tissue all over it. The eye didn't look like it actually worked very well. The pupil was very dilated. It was a really nasty looking situation. So that was really the end for Margarito as a top flight guy, even though he still had the big Miguel Cotto rematch. But Pacquiao, yeah, the damage he took in that fight, going 12 rounds with Manny, taking shots to that eye over and over and over. I think that really just did him in.
Well, legacy is up to the fans, and it's up to you. Let us know in the comments section what you think. It has been Boxing Scene Today, another great anniversary. Love talking about him. Join us here for all your boxing news and find out why millions are watching.